My husband threw tantrums for months, slamming sauce jars so hard they cracked and flipping the coffee table like a toddler, while his mom just sat there and said, "Boys will be boys." So, I decided to throw bigger ones back. He thought he was the only one who could go off, but he didn't realize that matching his energy was just the beginning of the end of his little reign of terror. The first time I saw the real Mark, we were in the middle of a Kroger on a random Tuesday. We'd been married for exactly 90 days, and honestly, the honeymoon phase was still high-key in full swing. Or so I thought. We were walking down the pasta aisle, and I reached for a jar of Prego. It was on sale, and I was trying to be mindful of our budget since we just dropped a bag on our duplex deposit. Mark's hand shot out like a snake. He snatched the jar out of my hand and slammed it back onto the metal shelf with so much force I actually heard the glass spiderweb. It made a sharp, sickening crack that echoed through the aisle. "Clara, are you deadass right now?" he hissed, his face inches from mine. "Look at the label. This has 15 grams of added sugar. Do you want me to get fat? Is that the goal?" I stood there, frozen. A teenage store employee a few feet away stopped stocking the shelves and just stared at us, eyes wide. My face was burning. Mark didn't even look at the cracked jar or the mess it was about to make. He just turned on his heel and walked off toward the frozen section like nothing had happened. I stood there for a second, my heart pounding, then grabbed the jar anyway, partly because we needed sauce and partly because I was too embarrassed to leave it there. When we got home, the vibe was straight up toxic. I started unpacking the groceries, and the second Mark saw that jar of Prego come out of the bag, his eyes went dark. He didn't say a word. He just walked over, grabbed the jar, and tossed it into the trash can. Then he made himself a protein shake, went into his office, and slammed the door so hard a picture frame in the hallway rattled. I should have known right then that I was in trouble. But I told myself he was just stressed. He worked from home as an IT consultant, and his boss, Mr. Henderson, was a notorious micromanager. I told myself it was just a bad day. I was wrong. It wasn't a bad day, it was a blueprint. Over the next few months, the tantrums became the new normal. If I bought the wrong brand of coffee creamer, he'd wait until I was watching and then pour the entire bottle down the kitchen sink, staring me in the eyes the whole time. If I forgot to record a game on the DVR, he'd go into the living room, unplug the TV, and carry it out to the garage, telling me that if I didn't care about his hobbies, I didn't deserve to have a distraction in the house. It was exhausting. I was working 40 hours a week at the vet clinic, dealing with sick dogs and stressed-out owners, only to come home to a man-child who was constantly one minor inconvenience away from a total meltdown. The worst night, the night I realized I was losing my mind, was when I got stuck at the clinic for an emergency C-section on a bulldog. I was 2 hours late. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. I walked into the bathroom to wash the smell of antiseptic off my hands, and I stopped dead. Every single pillow, every blanket, and every sheet from our king-sized bed was shoved into the bathtub. And the shower was running. Mark had turned it on full blast, soaking everything we owned in freezing cold water. I walked into the bedroom, and he was lying on the bare mattress, scrolling on his phone. "Since you're so obsessed with your job that you can't be home on time to make dinner, I figured you wouldn't mind sleeping in a swamp," he said, not even looking up. "I don't think you deserve a comfortable bed tonight." I slept on the couch that night, shivering under a thin decorative throw, while he sprawled out in the master bedroom like a king. My best friend Jenny kept telling me to leave. "Clara, this is high-key abusive behavior," she'd say over coffee. "He's trying to control you with fear." But I wasn't ready to give up. I wanted to handle it. I thought if I was just better, or faster, or quieter, he'd go back to the guy I dated for 2 years. Then his mom, Audrey, came to visit. We were in the living room, and I had forgotten to pick up Mark's specific brand of protein bars. When he realized the pantry was empty, he didn't just complain. He walked over to the coffee table and flipped it. Boom! My glass of water, my Kindle, and a vase of flowers went flying. I looked at Audrey, expecting her to be horrified. I expected her to pull her son aside and tell him he was acting like a lunatic. Instead, she just sighed and reached for her purse. "Oh, Marky," she said, her voice dripping with that fake, sweet honey. "You always did have your father's temper." She turned to me and shrugged. "Boys will be boys, Clara. My husband used to break plates when the house was too loud. It's just how men process stress. It's your job to make sure the environment is peaceful so he doesn't feel the need to explode." I felt something snap inside me. Boys will be boys. I was working a full-time job, paying half the bills, and doing all the chores, and she was telling me it was my fault he was flipping furniture over a snack bar. That was the moment I stopped being the victim. I realized that the peace Audrey was talking about was really just me becoming a doormat. And I wasn't built for that. The next day, Mark threw the TV remote at the wall because the Wi-Fi was buffering during a game. It left a dent in the drywall. Usually, I would have apologized for the slow internet. This time, I didn't say a word. I walked over to his desk, picked up his $300 custom gaming headset, walked to the back door, and launched it into the darkness of the backyard. "Oops," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "I guess my stress just made me lose my grip." Mark's jaw hit the floor. "Are you serious? You just threw my headset into the mud. What is wrong with you?" "I don't know, Mark," I said, smiling for the first time in weeks. "Maybe it's just girls being girls. Isn't that what your mom said? We all have our ways of processing." He spent 2 hours out there with a flashlight, cursing and digging through the tomato plants to find it. When he finally came back in, he looked at me like I was a stranger. Good. That was the point. The escalation didn't stop there. A few days later, he poured out my expensive salon shampoo because I took too long in the shower. He thought I'd cry. Instead, I went into the kitchen, grabbed his giant tub of $80 vanilla protein powder, and dumped the entire thing into the kitchen trash can, right on top of the old coffee grounds and onion peels. "You did not just do that," he whispered, his face turning a deep, angry red. "I did," I said. "Since I don't have enough time to wash my hair, I figured you don't have enough time to build muscle. Fair is fair, right?" He had to dig through the trash with a spoon to try and salvage what he could. It was pathetic. And I was just getting started. The breaking point, the moment the Cold War turned into a full-blown battlefield, happened during his big quarterly meeting. He was on a video call with Mr. Henderson and 3 of their biggest clients. Mark had been acting like a total Karen all morning, complaining that the vacuuming I'd done 2 hours ago had disrupted his headspace. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I accidentally dropped a metal baking sheet. It made a loud clatter. Mark came storming out of his office, his face contorted. "Clara. I am on a call. Do you want me to lose my job? Stop being so clumsy and incompetent." He screamed it loud enough for his mic to pick it up. I looked at him, then I looked at the stack of cast iron pans in the cabinet. I felt a cold, calm energy wash over me. "You're right, Mark. I am so sorry. Let me just fix that." I grabbed the biggest skillet we had and dropped it. Clang. Then I grabbed the saucepans. Clatter. Boom. Crash. I dropped every single one of them, one by one, right there on the tile floor. Mark looked like he was going to have a stroke. He lunged for the office door to shut it, but it was too late. I could hear Mr. Henderson's voice coming through the laptop speakers. "Mark? What is going on over there? Is everything okay?" Mark slammed his laptop shut so hard I thought the screen would snap. He marched over to me, his hands balled into fists, breathing like a bull. He stopped about 3 feet away, and for the first time, I didn't back up. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, holding a heavy cast iron pan, staring him right in the eyes. "You ruined it," he whispered, his voice shaking with a type of rage I'd never seen before. You did that on purpose. I was just expressing my frustration, Mark, I said, my voice as smooth as silk. Isn't that what you do? I'm just matching the energy of our home. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just stood there, looking at me with something that looked suspiciously like fear. He realized the sweet, easy-to-manage wife was gone. He spun around and punched the hallway wall, his fist going straight through the drywall with a sickening crunch. Then he stomped into his office and locked the door. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by pans, my heart racing. I realized I had won the battle, but the war was just beginning. And I knew exactly who he was calling. The silence that followed the Great Pan Massacre was louder than the noise itself. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by cast iron and stainless steel, while my heart pounded in my ears like a drum. Through the thin walls of the duplex, I could hear Mark's voice. It wasn't the usual aggressive bark, it was high-pitched, frantic, and, dare I say, shook. She's dead-ass lost her mind, Mom, I heard him whisper through the office door. I'm not even kidding. She's acting like a total psycho. My meeting is ruined. Winston is probably going to fire me. You need to get over here. I didn't even bother cleaning up the pans. I walked straight to the living room, sat on the couch, and pulled out my phone. I started scrolling through my receipts folder. It was a collection of every bit of property damage Mark had caused since the wedding. The cracked sauce jar. The soaked bedding. The dent in the wall from the coffee mug. I was looking at the evidence of a man who thought he was the only one allowed to have big feelings. Less than 40 minutes later, I heard the sound of a key turning in the front door. Not a knock. Not a, hey, are you home? Just the sound of someone who thought they owned the place. Audrey walked in, her purse clutched to her chest like she was entering a war zone. She didn't even look at me, she went straight to the kitchen. I heard her gasp. Clara? What in the world is all this? Did you throw these? I was just expressing myself, Audrey, I called out from the couch, not even looking up from my phone. Isn't that what we do in this family? We process stress through noises, right? Audrey walked into the living room, and she looked high-key pressed. She stood over me with her hands on her hips, giving me that look she usually reserved for servers who didn't refill her iced tea fast enough. Clara, honey, we need to talk about your attitude, she said, her voice dripping with that fake, condescending honey. Mark is in his office having a panic attack. A wife is supposed to be a sanctuary, not a source of chaos. You're affecting his career. Do you know how much pressure he's under to provide for you? Provide for me. I laughed, finally looking up. Audrey, I pay half the rent. I pay for the groceries. I pay for the insurance on the car he uses. He isn't providing, he's participating. And right now, he's participating in a way that involves punching holes in my walls. I stood up and shoved my phone in her face. I started swiping through the photos. Look at this. This is the sauce jar he slammed. This is the bed he soaked. This is the remote he broke. Is this the piece you taught him, Audrey? Because it looks more like a toddler who needs a nap. Audrey's face went through 3 different shades of beige. She looked at the photos, her lips pinched tight like she'd just sucked on a lemon. Well, she huffed, men have tempers. It's a biological fact. You're supposed to de-escalate, not match him. You're just making it worse. You need to be firm with your emotions, Clara, or you're going to lose your husband. Firm? I dead-ass couldn't believe her. You mean I should be a doormat so he can keep being a bully? No thanks. If he wants to be firm, he can be firm with himself. Audrey didn't say anything else. She just walked to the office door, knocked softly, and whispered, Marky, it's Mom. Let's talk. I sat back down on the couch. I could hear them in the kitchen, their voices low and urgent. I caught snippets of the conversation. She's changed, Impossible to live with, and then the one that made my stomach do a backflip. You need to be firm with her, Mark. Don't let her think she's in charge. That night, the Cold War went from freezing to sub-zero. Mark didn't come out for dinner. He stayed in his office until Audrey left, and then he emerged with a look on his face that was straight up chilling. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was calm. Calculating. He went into the guest room, and I heard him dragging something across the floor. I walked to the doorway and froze. He was pulling the mattress off the guest bed. "What are you doing?" I asked. "If you want to act like a roommate who doesn't respect my work, then you can sleep like a roommate," he said, his voice flat. "But since I pay for half this duplex, I'm taking the extra mattress for my office. You can have the couch. Or the floor. I don't really care." He dragged the mattress into his office and slammed the door. I heard the lock click. The new lock. He had actually installed a deadbolt on his office door while I was at work a few days ago. I stood in the empty guest room, looking at the bare metal frame, and for the first time, I didn't feel like fighting. I felt hollow. This wasn't matching energy anymore. This was just a race to the bottom. I looked out the window at my tomato plants. They were drooping, their leaves turning yellow because I'd been too busy plotting my next move to actually water them. My life was wilting, and I was standing there with a watering can full of gasoline. The next morning, the petty levels hit an all-time high. I went to the kitchen to make my morning coffee, and the pantry door wouldn't budge. I pulled on the handle, thinking it was stuck, but then I saw it. A heavy-duty latch and a padlock. Mark had locked up the food. "Are you for real?" I yelled at the office door. "You're locking the pantry now? What are we, in middle school?" Mark's voice came through the door, smug and muffled. "I bought 80% of what's in there, Clara. Since you want to destroy my property, I'm protecting my investment. Buy your own snacks." I stood there, hungry and shaking with rage. I looked at the modem sitting on the counter. The little blue lights were blinking, providing the high-speed internet Mark needed for his important consulting. "Bet," I whispered. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a pan. I walked over to the wall, unscrewed the coax cable, grabbed the modem and the router, and walked out to my car. I put them in the trunk, locked it, and went to work. I spent the whole day at the clinic in a daze. Jenny, the head vet tech, found me in the break room staring at a cup of cold coffee. "Clara, you look like a ghost, bestie," she said, sitting down across from me. "What's the update? Is he still being a Karen?" I told her everything. The mattress. The locked pantry. The modem in my trunk. I expected her to laugh, but she didn't. She looked at me with this deep, heavy sadness. "Clara, stop," she said softly. "Look at what you're doing. You're winning the fights, but you're losing your soul. You're turning into a version of yourself that's just as toxic as he is. This isn't a marriage anymore. It's a mutually assured destruction. Is this really how you want to live? Spending your energy on how to lock him out of the Wi-Fi while he locks you out of the food? He started it, Jenny." I snapped. "And you're ending yourself," she replied. "He's a bully, Clara. You can't out-bully a bully without becoming one. You need to decide if you want to be right, or if you want to be free." I didn't have an answer for her. I went home that evening, the modem still in my trunk, feeling like a criminal. When I walked through the door, the house was a disaster. Mark had apparently tried to find the modem and, when he couldn't, he had vented his frustration. My bookshelf was flipped over. My favorite succulent was smashed on the floor. And then, there was a knock on the door. It was Mr. Russo, our landlord. He was a small, older man who usually didn't bother us, but tonight, he looked absolutely done. "I've had 3 calls today from the neighbors," he said, holding a clipboard. Crashing sounds. Yelling. I come over here and I see a hole in the hallway wall through the window. What is going on? Mark came out of his office, his face instantly switching into that charming guy mode that made me want to gag. Mr. Russo. So sorry. We had a little accident with a piece of furniture. We're already planning to fix it. Mr. Russo didn't buy it. He looked at me, then at the dirt from the smashed plant on the rug. I'm giving you a formal written warning. Any more property damage, any more noise complaints, and you're both out. I don't care who started it. I don't care who's right. I want my duplex in one piece. He handed us the paper and left. Mark turned to me, his eyes blazing. Look what you did. You almost got us evicted because of your little internet stunt. You're literally ruining my life. I'm ruining it. I yelled back. You're the one who punched the wall. You're the one who flipped the bookshelf. Because you provoked me, he screamed. We stood there in the hallway, yelling at each other over the ruins of a plant and a bookshelf, while a formal eviction notice sat on the counter. I looked at Mark, really looked at him, and I saw a man who would never, ever take responsibility. And then I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. I saw a woman who was tired, angry, and unrecognizable. Jenny was right. I was winning the war, but I was standing in a pile of ashes. That night, I didn't retaliate. I didn't hide his shoes or pour out his milk. I just went to the living room, lay down on the couch, and stared at the ceiling. I listened to Mark in his office, talking to his mom again, telling her how unstable I was. I realized then that matching his energy wasn't my power. It was my cage. I pulled out my phone and searched for something I should have searched for months ago, relationship therapists near me. But as I scrolled through the names, I wondered, was it too late? Had we already broken too many things to ever put them back together? Or was the only thing left to break, the marriage itself? I realized that, matching his energy, was like trying to put out a grease fire with a bucket of water, it just made everything explode. I started seeing Dr. Evans for individual therapy first. She didn't sugarcoat it. She told me that while Mark's behavior was classic emotional abuse, my retaliation was a trauma response that was turning me into a person I wouldn't recognize in 6 months. Clara, she said, leaning forward in her leather chair, you're playing a game where the only prize is a bigger hole in the wall. You need to stop reacting and start deciding. I went home and told Mark we were doing couples therapy or I was ghosting. No discussion, no, let's see. Just a flat-out ultimatum. Mark actually laughed at first, but when he saw me packing a go bag, he high-key panicked. He realized his sanctuary, aka his doormat, was officially out of service. He agreed to go, but only because his boss, Mr. Henderson, was already breathing down his neck. The first session was a total train wreck. Mark spent 40 minutes explaining how I was difficult and moody, and how I sabotaged his career with the pans. I sat there with my arms crossed, feeling the rage simmer. But then, Dr. Evans asked him a question that changed everything. Mark, you mentioned your father used to handle stress the same way. Did he ever get help for his outbursts? Mark went quiet. No. My mom said he just needed space. He was a provider. He had a right to be frustrated. That's a lie, Mark, I blurted out. I hadn't planned on saying it, but I'd been doing some digging into Audrey's old Facebook posts and some old family records I found in the attic. Your dad didn't just need space. He was legally mandated to go to anger management after he broke your neighbor's fence with a sledgehammer. Your mom just told everyone it was construction to save face. Mark's jaw dropped. He looked like he'd been hit with a physical weight. The boys will be boys narrative he'd been fed his whole life was a straight-up fairy tale. Audrey had been enabling a cycle of violence for 30 years, and she was doing the exact same thing to us. The real boss move happened 2 days later. Mr. Henderson called and said he was in the neighborhood and wanted to drop by for a casual coffee to discuss Mark's future with the firm. Translated, he wanted to see if the construction noise was actually a domestic war zone. Mark went into full-on panic mode. He spent the morning patching the holes in the wall with a frantic, desperate energy. He even bought me flowers, actual ones this time, not the funeral lilies, and begged me to play along. "Clara, please," he whispered as we heard Mr. Henderson's car pull into the driveway. "If he thinks things are bad here, I'm done. Just for an hour. Be the girl from the first year." I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of pity. He was so terrified of being seen as a failure, yet he was failing at the only thing that mattered. Mr. Henderson was a sharp, silver-haired man who didn't miss a thing. We sat in the living room, the air so thick with tension you could have cut it with a knife. Mark was being extra, laughing too loud at Henderson's jokes, pouring coffee like he was auditioning for a butler role. "So," Mr. Henderson said, his eyes scanning the freshly painted patch on the hallway wall. "The construction next door seems to have quieted down. Must be a relief." "Oh, absolutely," Mark said, his voice a pitch too high. "Right, Clara." I took a slow sip of my tea. I looked at the patch on the wall. I looked at Mark's shaking hands. And then I looked at Mr. Henderson. "Actually, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice calm and steady, "the noise wasn't coming from next door. It was coming from right here." Mark stopped breathing. He looked like he was about to pass out. "It was a difficult transition for us," I continued, "and we've had some learning curves with communication. But we've started professional counseling to address the outbursts. Mark is taking his mental health seriously now." Mr. Henderson didn't look angry. He looked relieved. He set his coffee down and looked at Mark. "Mark, I've had 3 employees burn out this year because they refused to admit they were struggling. I don't care about a construction lie. I care about a man who can't keep it together on a client call. If you're getting help, that's what I need to hear." Mark let out a breath that sounded like a deflating balloon. He didn't yell. He didn't flip a table. He just sat there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. After Mr. Henderson left, I expected Mark to go off. I expected him to scream that I'd embarrassed him. But he didn't. He just sat on the couch for an hour, staring at the wall. Then, he did something he'd never done in our entire marriage. He apologized. Not a "sorry if you felt that way" apology. A real one. "Clara, I didn't realize how much I was lying to myself. About my dad. About my mom. About everything. I've been a total jerk." It was a start. But the Karen in the background wasn't done yet. Audrey had apparently been listening through the duplex wall, or maybe she just had a sixth sense for her son's weakness. She burst through the front door 10 minutes later, her face red with fury. "Mark. I just saw Henderson drive away. What did she tell him? Did she ruin your promotion? I told you to be firm with her." She turned to me, her eyes like daggers. "You're a parasite, Clara. You're trying to destroy my son because you can't handle a real man." I stood up, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to throw a pan or a headset. I felt a cold, hard strength. "Audrey," I said, my voice cutting through her screeching. "The real man you raised is currently in therapy because he doesn't know how to be a person without breaking things. And as for the construction your husband did, I have the police reports from 1995. So, you can either sit down and be quiet, or you can find a new place to water your tomatoes, because you are officially banned from this duplex." The room went dead silent. Mark looked from me to his mother. For 30 years, he'd been her puppet. For 30 years, he'd believed his tantrums were his birthright. "Mom," Mark said, his voice shaky but firm. "I think you should leave. Clara's right. We need to handle this. Without you." Audrey looked like she'd been slapped. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then stomped out, slamming the door so hard the patches on the wall practically cracked. But as I looked at the wreckage of our living room, the dented walls, the broken trust, the years of lies, I realized that an apology and a ban on the mother-in-law were just the first steps. The war wasn't over. Because the next day, I found something in Mark's office that proved the revelation was deeper than just a temper. Mark was at his first individual therapy session, trying to fix his anger, or so I thought. I went into his office to finally organize the mess from when he threw his briefcase, and that's when I saw it. A thick, manila folder tucked behind his printer, labeled simply, Clara. I opened it, expecting maybe some sentimental stuff or old photos. Instead, it was a literal war chest. Mark had been documenting every single one of my retaliations. He had recordings of me dropping the pans. He had photos of his broken gaming headset in the mud. He had a log of every time I'd raised my voice. But the kicker? He had edited out the parts where he started the fights. He had a narrative built to make me look like the sole abuser, the crazy wife he was trying to help. And in the back of the folder was a draft of a divorce petition. He wasn't trying to save our marriage, he was trying to build a case to take the duplex, the savings, and my reputation. He was deadass planning to gaslight a judge the same way he'd gaslit me. I sat in his leather chair, my hands shaking, but I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. That Sarah was gone. I took my phone and photographed every single page of his Clara file. Then, I found the real gold, a second folder. This one contained his actual work performance reviews. He told me the noise made him lose his promotion. Lie. He'd been on a performance plan for 6 months because he was consistently late and missed meetings. He'd been using me as a scapegoat for his own professional failure. I called my lawyer, Patricia Chen, right then and there. Patricia, I have the receipts. All of them. It's time to move. The final showdown happened 48 hours later. It was a Thursday evening. Mark came home from work, acting all reformed. He even brought home Thai food again, trying to do the nice guy routine. But then, there was a knock at the door. It was Audrey. Of course. She had used her spare key, the one I'd forgotten to change, to let herself in. She looked smug, like she knew about Mark's secret folder. Clara, we need to have a family meeting, she said, sitting at the kitchen table like she was the CEO of our lives. Mark has shown me some concerning evidence of your behavior. We think it's best if you move out for a while. For your own mental health. Mark looked at the floor, acting like the sad, worried husband. I just want you to get better, Clara. But I have to protect my career. The recordings, they're pretty bad. I took a slow sip of my water. I felt like the main character in a movie about to deliver the final line. You mean the recordings where you cut out the part where you called me a clumsy incompetent right before I dropped the pans? Or the ones where you forgot to mention you'd already flipped the coffee table? Mark's head snapped up. His face went that familiar shade of deep red. What are you talking about? I pulled out my laptop and turned it toward them. I found your folder, Mark. And I found your work reviews. You know, the ones where Mr. Henderson says you're unreliable and prone to blame others for your mistakes. I also found the police reports from your dad's construction incidents in the 90s. Audrey stood up, her face turning a ghostly white. You have no right. That's private family business. It became my business when you told me boys will be boys while your son was destroying my life, I said, my voice as cold as ice. But here's the best part. I sent a copy of Mark's Clara folder to Mr. Henderson this afternoon. Along with a copy of the actual recordings I made, the ones that show the full context of his tantrums. Mark high-key panicked. You did what? Clara, you just ruined me. No, Mark, I said, standing up. You ruined yourself. Mr. Henderson called me an hour ago. He said he doesn't tolerate liars or people who use domestic issues to cover up poor performance. You're fired. Effective immediately. The silence that hit the room was deafening. Mark looked like his entire world had just glitched. Audrey started to scream, calling me every name in the book, but I didn't even hear her. I looked at Mark. Patricia is filing the divorce papers tomorrow, I said. And because I have documented proof of your property damage and your attempt to frame me, she's confident I'm getting the duplex. The landlord is already on board. He'd rather have a vet tech who pays the bills than a guy who punches holes in his walls. You can't do this. Audrey shrieked. He's your husband. He was a toddler in a man's suit, I replied. And you were his enabler. You guys can go be boys will be boys together in your house, Audrey. But you're getting out of mine. Now. I watched them leave. Mark was carrying his Sarah's outbursts folder like a trophy that had turned into lead. Audrey was still whispering poison in his ear as they walked to her car, probably telling him it was still my fault. 6 months later, the duplex is quiet. The holes in the walls are fixed, and this time, the patches were done by a professional I paid for with my own money. My tomatoes and peppers in the backyard are thriving, they're huge, red, and perfect. I'm still seeing Dr. Evans. She helped me realize that matching his energy was a lesson I needed to learn, but finding my own energy was the goal. I don't throw pans anymore. I don't launch headsets. I don't have to. Because I don't live with a person who makes me feel like I need to. Mark moved back in with Audrey. Last I heard, he's still consulting, but mostly he's just sitting in his childhood bedroom while his mom makes him sandwiches and tells him he's a good boy. He's her problem now. As for me, I'm dead-ass living my best life. No tantrums, no broken glass, and definitely no boys being boys. Just peace. And yeah, that's the takeaway. Don't match the crazy, expose it. Then change the locks.